A pleasure to meet all at last. And so, I am especially happy to be here with this new film for films I should have talked about years ago. Because after all, it not only was a unique choice for a free movie on YouTube, but it is one incredible piece of art here. From 1988, Bloodsport, starring the likes of Jean-Claude Van Damme, as well as Forrest Whitaker, Bolo Young, and many other unique faces, we do have ourselves quite a film to tackle here. Let me explain. It's the unique story of Frank Dukes, a man whom, of course, was originally put together for military usage, but unfortunately would abandon his post in terms of fighting himself in the form of a unique martial arts championship. Whatever he does, though, is rather risky. Basically speaking, Dukes ends up going to Hong Kong as a way of competing in a certain underground tournament known as the Kumite. Now, the Kumite is a bloody series of rounds that focuses on fights against powerful and dangerous individuals. The Kumite essentially allows for anybody to compete against those whom are possibly burly and brawly and full of muscles, some who might be jacked on drugs, some who might have huge criminal histories, some who are just downright stupid. It's one of those kind of unique underground series of fighting networks that happen to take place and are just as popular as any known sporting events. But of course, in Hong Kong, a place that originally had affiliation with the United Kingdom, but by the mid to late 90s, China would of course overtake the land for themselves, after a lot of rule from the UK eventually faded off. But while this film of course takes place before all that happened, and even was released before all that happened, it's still important to note the fact there's still a lot of people who might end up going there. Even I myself could see maybe a trip or two take place in a number of areas throughout the world, even Hong Kong. But that's not the point of me talking about all this. This is a unique film that centers on the story of Frank Dukes overall, and what the film does here is, first off, it showcases how Frank Dukes basically left his post, heads off to Hong Kong, and eventually finds various faces out there in that known city of China. But of course, what he mainly does is use his martial arts skills and takes him to whatever limits they possibly can. We do get ourselves a bit of a flashback in which that when he was a young guy, he of course got caught stealing swords by a man known as Mr. Tanaka. And while he's not exactly related to the Tanaka from the Karate Kid series, this Tanaka, played by Roy Xiao, still does do a lot for Mr. Dukes himself. Of course, when he grows up, he of course undergoes a lot of training. And a lot of training goes on, and it does take quite a while to do so. There's a lot of limits that get set into place, even Dukes himself getting tied up on all of his ankles and wrists and stretched to the point in which that he experiences a lot of pain. But Tanaka, of course, does instill a unique lesson for him in this instance. When he's stretched to his limits to the point in which he experiences a lot of pain, the power of meditation supposedly helps him clear it up to the point in which he restores his concentration and focus on the immediate task at hand. It's actually a unique lesson that some people might not realize. Whenever one is undergoing a lot of pain, it's often easy to get yourself distracted into it, as of course your body does try to warn you in the form of pain that something is going on. It could mean that your joints are becoming loose to the point in which they'll fall out of their sockets. It could be that your heart is becoming dysfunctional to the point where that an attack is imminent. It could be that there's a cramp going on in your system where your muscles basically swell up, creating a very painful series of reactions in your body. Or it could be a variety of whatever else goes on. Whatever the case may be though, apart from the many loads of other training that we're treated to it's a unique sight for the sound and vision. The ears and eyes alone can take up a lot of information in this regard. With several scenes that allow for us to experience things in hand, we do get to see a lot of highs and lows that Dukes goes throughout his training sessions, until eventually a sword is used. Tanaka, of course, hands it to him, and this is a sign for Dukes that he is ready to do anything at this point. And all of this because he practically stole that same sword earlier as a kid? Oh, but what eventually happens is that there's a funeral that goes on. His training is basically shut down from this point on, and so it seems easy to understand why he eventually would become a U.S. military agent. But of course, when abandoning his post and heading back to his long-term dream of being a martial arts champion, he eventually does discover word, especially after competing against a fellow United States person. What he finds out is that after some talking with a man known as Ray Jackson, and especially after beating him in a video game, and of course having some drinks here and there also eventually comes a woman known by the name of Janice Kent, played by Leah Ayres, that a kumite is going to take place. And especially noting the fact that between these three characters and more, the kumite happens to be organized in a number of ways. As in, it usually works sort of like a tag team. Basically, Jackson and Dukes are partnered up with a young man, and what goes on is that Chong Li eventually guides them about how the whole thing works. And soon enough, they are fighting against various champions of Hong Kong and beyond. In the first round or so, we do get to see a lot of crap that takes place. Even Jackson gets a lot of blood on his own body, and it's easy to tell that the kumite is going to be one brutal championship. But we of course are spared the agony of a lot of this potential blood and gore, as we do eventually get to see a montage take place. Dukes and Jackson, amongst many other allied fighters that are all competing for the top spot, they do eventually get to the top. But this montage, I tell you, is well given to us, with a lot of jump cuts that show off a lot of unique fighting talent, and of course a lot of the training that Dukes himself had gone through, as we had seen earlier. It's all set to a beautifully orchestrated series of soundtracks, and even a song by Stan Bush. Yeah, the same guy whom had also been well known for Rocky Balboa and Transformers is now also in this, Bloodsport. I guess you can say that throughout the second half of the 80s, Stan Bush was everywhere, amongst many other rock stars at the time. But by the time we do eventually get towards the ending of the whole thing, Dukes himself had not only gotten caught up in a crossfire with FBI agents who had been chasing him throughout Hong Kong, as we do see a few different times, but there eventually comes a point in which that he makes a deal with them. He will return to the United States after his final round in the kumite, which would either enlist him as the champion of Hong Kong's kumite, or just second hand to whomever succeeds after him. Well, the agents themselves actually join up in this competition, and they actually spectate on the sides alongside Jackson and the others. And that's because Jackson himself actually got injured. Chong Li, as mentioned before, was a pretty horrible fighter, and he certainly proved his worth by busting up Jackson so hard he got sent to the hospital. And even worse, he actually stole something from him and wrapped it around his leg, marking him that he defeated Jackson. And what eventually happens is that Chong Li himself ends up saying this pretty horrifying quote: "I will break you just like I broke your friend." So Chong Li actually says only two things in the entire film, essentially using his own facial expressions as communications against Dukes and many of the other characters. The fact that he says this to Dukes' face means Dukes better take it seriously. Otherwise, he is going to end up just like Jackson. End up right in the hospital. And just like when he's already had enough to deal with. I mean, the fact that he's being threatened with all kinds of punishments because the FBI agent's been chasing him, and more importantly, his own military commanders are probably going to have to court-martial him for abandoning his post like that. Going AWOL, if you will. So, this fight is really one of a kind. You have Dukes, a shining star, and you have Chung Lee himself. Obviously not related to Chung Lee from the Street Fighter games. This, of course, was around the same time that the original Street Fighter, believe it or not, would come around, in the arcades at least, and eventually finding its way to computers and the TurboGrafx 16. But we had this Chung Lee guy before then. So, interesting connection? Maybe. But in any case though, Dukes versus Lee. It all comes down to that point. And while the fight itself was initially a bit fruitless for both of them, as they both seemed to be evenly matched, the beliefs coming from his allies on the sidelines, especially the likes of Janice, and even the spirit of Jackson himself, they're all heralding in Dukes' supposed victory. And as Dukes makes one epic kick to Lee, oh man, it is just as bloody as it sounds. But Dukes comes out victorious. Wow. And trust me, having watched through that whole film, I could tell you firsthand that this whole film has just been one of a kind. I mean, it was incredible to see such unique fighting films in which that with such people out there like Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee, and etc. It was unique to see Jean-Claude Van Damme get to do his own work on this sort of stuff. And Bloodsport was certainly a one-of-a-kind film. Not just because of the performances of Van Damme and the others associated with this film, but just because the fact that this sort of underground fighting competition is just as bloody and violent as it sounds. It really showcases the kind of reality that's set in motion, especially when you think about the fact that this kind of fighting is not something that everybody can do. But as we saw from Dragon Ball and we saw from most other forms of media, it does seem that garbage can become the elite. Given enough work, practice, and experience in the field known as fighting. Whether it's a cultural thing or whether it's just a hobby that people take up, in a way, we're all well experienced in that field. It just takes a lot to pull it off. I myself, of course, do continue to train because you never know what's going to happen in life. Anyways, though, Bloodsport is still an impressive film for 1988. And I'm kind of ashamed that I missed out on that one. But hey, I'm glad to have finally caught up on that one. So this does, in fact, bring my total score to a pretty good extent. 8.8 out of 10.1. And when you think that's enough 88s for you, there's probably a lot of other films from 1988 I'll have yet to talk about. But I'll be glad I did so, though. So in that sense, make sure to let you like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.